book was published in 1945. It's been around a long time, and just about anybody that's ever gone to school has probably read it. There's a lot that's already been said about The Catcher in the Rye, and its title, which seems a little mysterious at first. I mean, Catcher in the Rye, what is that? You may know, or you may not, that it's actually a poem that was then turned into a song. The poem was by Robert Burns in Scottish, like a dialect, so it's kind of hard to read for modern English readers. But if you want to check it out, you can look it up on the internet and find it. What's the title mean? Why did he choose? Salinger could have titled this book The Story of Holden Caulfield. He could have titled it anything. Why did he title it Catcher in the Rye? What does that image suggest? So when you're reading the book, pay attention to the title and how it's used in the book, and also other ideas that could connect with it that come up in the book. Now, the main character we meet in the very beginning, in fact, he's our narrator. It's a first-person narrator. The narrator is the same person who's telling the story about himself or herself. Another great example of a first-person narrator is Katniss Everdeen in the Hunger Games trilogy. If you really want to hear about it, the first thing you'll probably want to know is where I was born and what my lousy childhood was like and how my parents were occupied and all before they had me and all that David Copperfield kind of crap. But I don't feel like going into it if you want to know the truth. David Copperfield is a book by Charles Dickens, and by saying that, Holden is sort of saying, you know what, I'm taking the traditional way of doing things, and I'm not going to do it, right? This is already setting him up as being anti-establishment, which he clearly is, or at least he wants to be. Oh, he talks a lot about phonies. Now, phoniness and authenticity, that's a big issue that comes up in this book. The reason I look all shifty out here is I'm in a public park, and when people pass by and they see me talking into a camera holding up Catcher in the Rye, I think they think I'm some kind of nut. So until the cops show up, I'm going to just press on. He himself admits to being a liar, and we catch him in many lies throughout the story. But his big issue he takes up with in Chapter 1 is his brother, D.B. His brother just goes by initials, D.B. And his brother is a Hollywood writer. He writes for the movies, and Holden hates the movies because they're phony. He says he used to be a regular writer when he was at home. And now he's out in Hollywood being a prostitute. And if there's one thing I hate, it's the movies. Holden is just sort of tries to be this very idealistic kid. Everybody that works performs a service and gets paid. Is that always prostitution? When your parents go to work and get a job and bring home money, they're selling their time basically for money. Does that make them prostitutes? In the strict definition that Holden thinks, everybody's a prostitute. Holden is very rigid in his thinking, and that sometimes gets him into a lot of trouble. When we meet Holden in Chapter 1, he's sort of watching a football game, but he's not really watching it. In fact, he says he's standing way up on top of Thompson Hill looking down on the game. And a lot of people interpret this as saying, well, Holden is showing us through his actions his psychological state of mind. He's isolated. He's aloof, literally, because he's up on a hill. The game's down here and he's up here. He's aloof or above everything that's going on in life. The game, some argue, represents life. His old teacher, Mr. Spencer, says that life is like a game and that Holden better learn how to play it. And we see here Holden is not playing the game at all. In fact, he's not even interested in the game. He's standing far away from the game. He's not part of it. We also find out that Holden was involved with this team sport. He was involved with fencing. He was the manager of the fencing team. He left the fencing equipment on the subway. This is interesting, I think, because Holden is a native New Yorker, and the reason he says he forgot the stuff on the subway was because he needed to look at a map. As a native New Yorker, I find it hard to believe that Holden would need to consult a map and be so distracted by consulting a map that he would forget to take the equipment. I mean, a giant bag of fencing equipment, I'm sure, would not be something that would be easy for him or anyone else on the team to overlook. So there's something going on there that I think would be worth thinking about. And he says, the whole team ostracized me. That's what his quote is. The word ostracized comes from Greek. Lady walking by in a stroller looked at me like I was a little funny, so I waited till she passed. It comes from the Greek word ostrakon, which means a shell, and is what the Greeks used to cast their votes. It was like a ballot. And so if you were ostracized, that means enough people put your name down on the shell to say you had to get out of town. In a way, Holden is being rejected, ostracized by Pensy Prep, for not being a good citizen of that school. Then Holden says the school is full of phonies, and it raises this other question. The motto of the school is, since 1888, we've been molding boys into splendid, clear-thinking young men. Right on the next page, Holden talks about how he got his coat stolen and his gloves stolen. This school's got a fine academic reputation, but it's full of crooks. Whole disconnect between what the school says that it does and what the school actually does. 1888, interestingly enough, the year that the school was supposedly founded, is also the year that Thomas Edison patented his first movie. And as we know, Holden hates the movies. Van Gogh cut off his ear in 1888. Are all of these things intended connections by the author? Who knows? It's just interesting as a reader to note these kinds of connections and see how they fit together and see if they can help us think about reading the story in a way that we might not otherwise. For a variety of reasons, I had to change locations. It's a new day, and I got different sunglasses. Where we left off, we were wondering, 1888 happens to be the same year that Edison invented the movies, or at least patented the movies. It also happened to be the year that Vincent van Gogh, in a fit of probable insanity, lopped off a piece of his ear. He never cut off his whole ear, by the way. That's a myth. It was just a little piece of the earlobe, which is still crazy, but less crazy. And Holden, of course, talks about his madman adventures here at this point in his life. So is there a connection, and was that connection intentional? Only J.D. Salinger would know for sure, and he's not giving interviews right now. The fancy word would be a parapraxis. Parapraxis, that's another word for a Freudian slip. I don't know how much you've learned about Sigmund Freud, the psychologist and psychiatrist, father of psychoanalysis. You might have been too busy prepping for state tests when you should have been learning about that. Not your fault. He had this idea that sometimes things that we're thinking about a lot pop out in our speech or in our actions, even when we don't intend it. You want to ask your mother, please pass the salt, and you say, Mom, I hate you, die. All right, that's a little bit of an extreme example. But anyway, my dog bothering me. Did Salinger intend to put these things on the same date that his school, Pensy Prep, was founded in, or was it something non-intentional? Again, don't know for sure, but it's certainly something interesting to think about. The other interesting thing to think about, he goes to visit his teacher, Mr. Spencer, who lives on Anthony Wayne Avenue. Now, when an author takes the time to list a detail like that, it's usually a good idea for the reader to think about, well, why Anthony Wayne Avenue? If you do a little bit of research on the internet, you'll find that Anthony Wayne was a Revolutionary War general who, because he was defeated in a significant battle and felt so bad about the loss of his own troops, he actually put himself up for court-martial. The court-martial found that he was not at fault, that there's nothing he could have done, and he was a good general, so he was reinstated. General Washington approved of this. Much like Holden, who's sort of putting himself up for court-martial in the story, there's that connection there. Incidentally, Anthony Wayne, because of his tactics in other battles, earned the nickname Mad Anthony Wayne. Is there a connection between Anthony Wayne, Mad Anthony Wayne, and Holden, who's describing his madman adventures that happened when he was kicked out of Pensy Prep? I don't know, but if you have to write a paper, that is certainly something that would be worth researching and looking into. Oh, the other fancy literary term we were going to talk about was juxtaposition. When a writer takes two different images or two different ideas and bumps them up against each other so that you can compare and contrast them. What he does in this particular chapter is Salinger takes the idea that, Pensy Prep is this place where they mold these fine young gentlemen, and in the same page even, Holden says, academically it's got this incredible reputation, Pensy Prep, but at the same time, the people that go there stole his coat and gloves. Kind of low lifes that go to a fancy school and get good grades, but they're still low lifes. Putting those two images together, the school's idea of what it wants to be and the fact that Holden even says it's got this high reputation, next to the fact that he says my stuff was stolen, that's a juxtaposition. It's taking two contrasting images and putting them up next to each other so that you can see how they compare and contrast to each other. That pretty much wraps up that chapter. In the next part of this, he goes and visits his old teacher, Mr. Spencer. Until then, salud.